Hello, sewing people of the internet. Well, the backpack is done, and in this episode I'm going to show you how I finished the backpack, and then I'm going to tell you all the things that I like about it, and there's quite a few things that I don't like about it. There's definitely some things I would recommend doing differently if you were following along in this, so hopefully you haven't started already. But it turned out really good. I'm really happy with it. So let's see how I finished it. So in this episode we're going to do the final assembly of the backpack, but before I continue with that, I wanted to show you one of the options that you have when making a backpack. If you prefer a clamshell style zip open backpack, then you can turn this backpack into one by stopping before you attach the front panel and putting in a zipper. So right now this is all just clipped together, it's not actually sewn, but I've attached the front panel with some clips with a zipper separating the gusset from the front panel, and that's really all there is to it. You just basically need to make a zipper tab similar to the ones that we made for the zipper that goes all the way around the bottom of the pack. And again, there are many variations on how you can do this. This is just one way to do it. I'm going to unclip all this so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But the important thing to note is that you would need to figure this out and do this before you attach the front panel, whereas if you're doing a top opening like I'm going to do on this pack, then you just sew this panel in, as you'll see in a little bit. So here's the zipper and the kind of zipper tab extension thing that goes across the bottom that I was talking about. And probably the easiest thing to do would be to have the zipper longer than you need. Figure out where you want this extension to end on each side of the pack, and then sew the zipper on one side and just run it over and mark where it needs to be, and then you can cut it to length and sew it together. You could obviously take careful measurements to accomplish that, but it would just be easier doing it that way. Hey, so I was just editing this video and I realized I didn't make one point about this. If you want to put a zipper on a bag like this, this bag is designed as a top-loading bag, and if you put a zipper on the front panel, it becomes a front-loading bag, which means you have to have something to close the top, since it's no longer top-loading. So I think the easiest way to do this, if you want to use all the same pieces I've cut out here and make a front-loading bag with a zipper, is to take this gusset and just turn it over and put it on so that the what was the bottom is now the top of the bag. And then you just have to make a bottom panel, which, if you're kind of following along with how I'm doing this, you would be already making a second layer either out of your inner tube if you're doing that, or just, you know, the fabric you make your pack out of. So since you're going to be doing that anyway and kind of wrapping it up the sides, I think it makes more sense to just make the bottom the top and then make a new bottom. I hope that makes sense. I'll eventually get around to making a video of making a backpack of this style that'll have more detail, but hopefully this will help you figure it out. So now that we've covered the option of a zipper front, we can go back to assembling our backpack. Now, this looks like it's already put together, but I've just clipped the back panel and the gusset together and turned it out. And I strongly recommend you to do this, especially if you're newer at this, or if you're only making one. If you're in a production environment making 100 of these, this might slow things down, but you know, if you're just going to make a backpack for yourself, you know, put it together with clips or somehow temporarily, and turn it out and look at it and see if there's anything you want to change, anything that didn't line up right, so that you can make any adjustments or modifications now. The last thing you want is to completely sew everything together and install your liner and have it finished, turn it out for the first time and realize that your water bottle pockets are, you know, a couple of inches different heights or something like that. So this is the time to carefully inspect everything and make sure you're ready to proceed before you do. I'm happy with how the back panel looks, so now I can attach the front panel and do the same thing. Okay, so I've clipped the front panel on, and I took the back panel off because with as thick as all this is, trying to turn it out with just binder clips holding it just isn't going to work. It's just going to come apart. So I took the back panel off, put the front panel on, lined everything up the way I wanted it to be, and thanks, buddy. And I think I'm pretty happy with how everything's lining up. My bottle pocket tops are lined up with the top of the front pocket, and the inner tube bottom is, looks like it's pretty even on both sides. So I think I'm happy with how everything is lined up. So now I'm ready to sew everything together permanently. So after I finished sewing the gusset onto the front panel and turned it out, I realized that there was a little bit of an alignment problem, and that's a risk you might take, you know, if you don't want to pin or baste or clip or otherwise attach the pieces together before you sew them, and then you know, remove whatever attachment system you're using as you sew. It's faster if you don't do that, but only if you don't mess up and have to go back and redo something. So what I found was I had a difference in where the rubber inner tube was lining up on either side. So I've seam ripped this side open, and I've clipped 2 points together where the bottle pocket top and the front pocket top meet, and where I want the inner tube to terminate on the side, so that it'll be even with the other side. And I'm just going to tack those two places by just sewing a short section together, and then I'll sew it again. So I've re-sewn the front panel on. Now I'm happy with the alignment where the rubber bottom panel lines up on both sides, and the alignment of the bottle pockets with the front pocket. Now I can sew the back panel on. Alright, so I've finished sewing on the front and the back panels to the gusset, and I've turned it out so I can inspect everything to make sure that everything's lined up the way I want. There's no other changes I need to make, because after this we're going to put in the lining, and then it just gets more and more difficult to go back and fix anything. So everything looks good. I'm pleased with how everything has lined up. The zipper opens well on the laptop sleeve. I think everything's good, so now we can start on the liner. The liner, in my case, is pretty simple. So you have a front panel and a back panel, and they're exactly the same, and you have the gusset, and they're all exactly the same as the similar pieces for the exterior of the pack. And the fabric, in my case, doesn't have a right side or a wrong side. They're all the same. So all I have to do is just sew them together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. It doesn't matter which side is which or anything. It's very simple. Well, okay, it's not as simple as I thought. So now I have my liner ready to go into the bag. One quick thing to note, on both the liner and the bag, the gusset ends up being a little bit longer than the front and back. I think that's because of the way the gusset rounds the corners off on the bottom, so it's not truly going to the edge. Regardless, it doesn't matter. The important dimension is the length of the front and the back panels, so if the gusset is a little bit long, you can just trim it off even. And, you know, unless you're going for a really specific size, if for some reason the gusset was shorter and you had to trim the front and the back a little bit, you know, don't sweat it. In the end, you just want them to all be the same. So now to attach the liner to the bag, I've got to turn the bag inside out again. And again, you could just leave it inside out when you finish sewing it and sew your liner in, but the time it takes to turn it out and inspect everything and then turn it inside out again is minimal compared to taking this all apart, because you realize after you finish that you made a mistake that you could have caught earlier. So again, I encourage you to take the time to turn it out, make sure everything looks good before you move on. I'm probably being repetitive here, but I want to point out once again, if you want to put some kind of a pocket or a Velcro or any kind of organization on your liner, then you need to do that before you put it together and before we put it on the bag, obviously. So again, like, stop and think, is this done? Do I want to have a slip pocket on the back of my backpack on the inside for whatever? This is the time to make sure you've got everything you want. Okay, so if you're ready to put your liner in, the way that I'm going to do this is perhaps the only truly difficult part of this entire process as far as I'm concerned. And it's a bit risky, and in fact I don't know how it's going to turn out with this material. I've done this before on the prototype pack, so we'll see how it goes. There is an easier option if you're willing to have a little bit of looseness in your liner. I want my liner to more or less appear to be adhered throughout the bag, but you could just sew it to two seams, one on each side of the back panel, and then turn the project out, and it'll get sewn around the mouth, and it might be a little bit floppy on the front, but it'll probably be fine. But what I intend to do is sew it to all 4 seams, and there's kind of an order to this. So you have to take one seam and sew it to the front or back, it doesn't matter. Then the one next to that gets sewn to the front or the back, and then this one comes over and gets sewn again to whichever side it is, doesn't matter. And then the last one can get stretched over and sewn in, and then the whole thing has to get turned out, and that's going to put a lot of stress on the opening of the bag. So if your stitching isn't adequate at the top, if you didn't do enough reversing at the top, or if just the material itself isn't strong enough, it could tear under that strain. If you know that the material you're using is questionable, then it might be a good idea to just do 2 sides, and probably on the back would be my suggestion, and then turn it out and see how it looks. Again, not to be repetitive, but it's worth emphasizing. You want to make sure to stitch the liner to the exterior of the bag in the seam allowance. If your sewing machine has a hard time getting all the way to the bottom, depending on how bulky your bag is and what materials you use, it doesn't really matter. If you get within an inch or 2 of the bottom, you probably will never be able to tell once it's all turned out. So just get as close as you can within reason. So now it's the moment of truth. The liner is sewn to all 4 of the vertical seams. This is really tight, and I've got to turn the entire pack right side out in between this one layer of the liner and then the other layer of the liner and the rest of the pack. So all of this has got to get turned against this. So, wish me luck. It's a boy! Okay, so now the backpack is inside out, the liner is right side out or in the correct orientation to the pack. Now I can turn the backpack right side out. And for the way I'm constructing this bag, that'll be the last time I have to turn this out. Okay, so I skipped ahead a little bit because you don't need to see me sew every seam on this bag, but the main part of the bag is done. I made a little bit of a mistake here, but it may actually work out in my favor, but I'll show you just in case you don't want to make that mistake. When I sewed the seam allowance of the liner to the seam allowance of the bag, I should have stopped an inch or two from the top. And what that would do, it would allow me to fold them both in towards each other and then sew them together to make a finished edge, which isn't strictly necessary for what I'm doing. But the way I was actually going to do this was I was going to take the roll top part and insert it between those two and then sew down. That's what I did on the prototype bag. Well, I forgot to leave that part at the top, and I didn't want to seam rip it out and risk having that, work its way loose over time. So what I've done is just sewn around the edge, leaving this raw edge, and I need to cover that when I put the roll top section on. Now, if you want to do a messenger bag style flap over this instead of the roll top, you definitely want to leave that space and roll these in towards each other and sew them down. Alternatively, you could put edge binding on the seam, but I'm trying to avoid binding at all costs in this project, so I'm not doing that. When I made the roll top section, I did remember to leave that space, so I was able to roll the edges in. The top, the part that will be the actual opening of the bag, I just rolled them in and sewed them together. And where the roll top section will attach to the bag, I folded in the liner and the exterior and sewed them down to themselves, leaving them open. And where the seams are, there's an inch or so that it can overlap over the raw edge and cover it. One other thing, I've gone ahead and sewn the upper closure strap that the buckle will be attached to, and I just sewed it into this seam and then came around and sewed it on top so that it'll have a clean appearance when it's on the bag. Because of the way this piece is going to sandwich over the lip of the bag, there's no way I can use clamps or binder clips or anything to attach it. I could use pins if I had pins that were sufficient to go through this many layers of this thick material, but I don't, and frankly I don't want to do that anyway. So I'm just going to do this by eye and go slowly and try to keep it as straight as I can. So in maybe episode 1 or 2 of this series, I talked about the fact that the extension collar on the prototype pack was way too long. And this is actually longer than this. There. So when I made the first prototype, I made the extension collar really long. And part of the reason for that is one potential advantage of a roll top pack is the ability to add items above what really is the end of the pack, and you can still get it closed if you have a long extension collar. I think this idea works well for an ultralight backpack made out of a lighter material, for like a thru hiker who, most of the time doesn't have that much, but then they may load up on food in a city or something and have extra capacity while they get through that food. For this kind of pack, I don't really think this is working out the way I thought it would, and it might be just me, but so this was way too long, and what I ended up doing on the prototype, just to kind of test a different length, was to fold the collar down inside. And in doing that, I decided to make the collar on the new pack a little bit shorter. The length of the extension collar on the second pack, which really quite honestly this is more of a second prototype than a finished product, but this worked out to be perfectly adequate for closing the pack. It could maybe be a little bit longer depending on how often you carry your pack filled to its capacity. But for my uses, this length worked out well. And I gave the dimensions for all this in episode 2, I think. But I think this is about a foot. As you can see in the construction footage, the way I constructed this pack was to make the backpack up to this point, make the extension collar as a separate assembly, and then join the two. There's a specific reason for me that I did that, because I'm testing the producibility of this pack in a kind of a modular way, so I could make the pack and then make it a flap cover or make it a roll top, just to kind of see if that's something that's feasible. Sewing the extension collar onto the pack is really difficult. So the stitches where the extension collar is attached to the main body of the bag are not that great looking. At work I use a cylinder arm machine, and I was really tempted to take this to work and just do it there, because it would have been much easier to do on a cylinder arm machine than on a flatbed machine. But most of you don't have cylinder arm machines at home, so I wanted to try to keep this somewhat honest even though I was using an industrial machine. If you're making this pack and you know you want a roll top from the beginning, I would recommend making the panels, the front panel, the back panel, and the gussets all the correct height to include the extension collar, and just do it all as one piece. I don't think there's any benefit to adding this on afterwards unless you're looking at producing different kinds of backpacks on the same basic platform. One change I made to the second bag was I went for this orange Cobra buckle instead of the polished stainless steel Cobra buckle that I intended to use. I just happened to see on the internet somebody using an orange one, and I had to have it for this pack because originally I wasn't planning on doing the orange top stitching. You know, I hadn't thought about that until it sort of evolved organically. And when I saw the orange buckle, I just knew I had to have it. So, quick note on these buckles. I talked to AustriAlpin, and as I understand it, they don't normally produce the orange buckle, and they did not have them in stock. I think you can request them somehow, but I'm not really super clear on that. I found these from a seller in the UK, and they didn't sponsor this video. I bought the buckle from them, but I'm going to put a link to their store in the description below. Just because their customer service was awesome. I saw that they had the buckle. Nobody else that I could find had them. And I sent them an email because I wasn't real clear on their shipping policies to the US. And within 5 minutes I got 2 emails from 2 different people responding to my question. Shipping was only like $2 for this thing. I mean, it's really easy to deal with, so really good customer service. Anyway, link in the description. This buckle is actually meant for 1 3/4 inch webbing, and I decided not to change out the 1.5 inch webbing because I still wasn't sure if I was going to keep this buckle or not, and I could easily seam rip this off and put the stainless steel buckle on if I want to. I don't think most people will notice that the buckle is not quite the right size, but it is a little bit loose. The webbing's a little bit loose on it, but it functions completely fine. So let's talk about some of the things that didn't turn out quite the way I wanted them to. This project is my first attempt at a roll top backpack. And I said in the opening of the first video in this series, I'm a professional seamster. And that's true. I'm not a professional backpack designer. So, you know, there's some things here that I'm trying to figure out as I go along. The way I dealt with the closure strap on this bag was to attach it at the bottom of the front panel behind the front pocket. And that seemed like it would, you know, provide a clean look for me. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where to attach this strap and not have it look like an afterthought. And that's what I came up with. I like the look of it. The problem is when, especially if the bag isn't completely full, and I usually don't carry a backpack completely full, when you pull pressure on it to close it, to secure the top, rather than pulling in from the front and the back to close the top, it tends to pull down and kind of turn this thing into a kind of a C shape. not what you want. To try to minimize that somewhat, I added this piece of webbing for the buckle to kind of come to rest against, and I also shortened the webbing that the top part of the buckle is attached to, and that's better. I think probably a better way to do it would be to just sew the webbing at where the mouth of the bag is, rather than have it attached down at the bottom. If you have a better idea how to deal with that problem, post it in the comments section below. On the first prototype backpack, I had the bottle pockets kind of starting at the bottom, and they ended up lining up a little bit below the mouth of this front pocket. On this pack, I decided to line up the top of the bottle pockets with the opening of the slip pocket, and I didn't really think about it, but that pulls the bottom up quite a bit. And when I first looked at this pack with it full, I didn't really like the look of the bottles being so high. I kind of felt like they should be on the bottom. After I've carried it for a little while, I've kind of grown to not care about it at all. I don't know that I like it better than the other way, but I don't dislike it as much as I thought I did initially. I mention it just to say that if this look doesn't do it for you, then you might want to think about having the bottle pockets more towards the bottom of your pack and not worry so much about where they land at the top. When I made the prototype pack, I felt like the padded portion of the shoulder straps were maybe a little bit too short. So for the second pack, I made them a bit longer, and I think they might be just a teeny bit too long. There's not a whole lot of room left for me to tighten these. I don't need them any tighter, but you know, if a smaller person, if anybody is really smaller than me, tried to put this on, there's really no more room. So again, just something to think about. I could easily shorten these without having to take the whole pack apart, so I'm not terribly worried about it. In the construction portion of the video, I didn't do anything to secure the foam inside the shell of the padded portion of the straps. Somebody actually commented on another strap video that I made years ago, suggesting that in that one I sewed around the perimeter of the straps, and I didn't want to do that this time. And they mentioned that doing that helps keep the foam from moving down within the strap. Well, that was an excellent point that they made, and I ended up having to make a change to this because that's exactly what happened. The foam started to creep down and bunch up at the bottom, especially on the left side strap, because I tend to pick the pack up and carry it over one shoulder if I'm just walking to the car or whatever. So this strap sees the most use. So what I did was I just went back and sewed the foam down in a couple of places behind the webbing so it's not visible. You could also secure the webbing in places to make a daisy chain. There's several ways you can do it, but just know that the foam, at least in my application here, probably does need to be secured in a few places because it definitely was bunching up, and that was definitely a mistake on my part. So those are the things that didn't quite turn out the way I wanted, but there's a lot I really love about this pack. First, I really love this waxed canvas that I got from Big Duck Canvas. The feel is great. It doesn't feel too waxy, which is nice. Looks fantastic. I'm just super happy with how it feels. This pack would be a different pack entirely in another material, but I love the look and the feel of this material. The canvas that I used on the interior actually turned out better than I thought. I tend to prefer a nylon material on the interior of packs, and time will tell how this holds up and how it stays clean and stuff. But so far I really like the look of it, and I kind of do like the idea of keeping it all canvas inside and out. I also used the same interior canvas on the back side of the straps, and I really like that look. It was totally improvised. I didn't realize I was going to do it, and then I just thought of it and tried it, and it looks great. I also love how the contrasting stitching adds to the look of the pack. One thing that I really like is the zipper garage that I made out of inner tube for the zipper on the front pocket. I love the way this looks, and it functions really well. I haven't had this out in any weather, but I'm pretty sure this will be quite water resistant. I'm super happy with the Cobra buckle, both because I love the orange look, but even with the stainless steel, just the function of this buckle in this application I think is really great, and it really adds a nice upscale look to the pack over just a standard plastic buckle. The straps I made for this pack are very simple to make, and with the FY20 foam that I got from Outdoor Wilderness Fabrics, they're really quite comfortable. Even though there's no contour shape to them, they're just basically rectangles. They're quite comfortable as they are. This front pocket has worked out to be quite useful. The access isn't great just because it's a flat pocket and there's no dimension to it. So if you carry a lot of stuff in a pocket like this, then maybe this particular design isn't great. But for me, the things I normally get out, I have a little journal that I keep notes in at work. I have a little pouch that I keep my earbuds in. Things like that are easy to access. I have the organizer pouches that I'm not going to try to show you again, where I have some pens and a multi-tool. Those aren't super easy to access, but I don't really use them very often. I just have them there so that if I need my multi-tool, I know where it is and I can get it. I also really like the slip pocket behind the front pocket. I routinely like to read a book while I'm on my lunch break, and this fits a paperback book very well. So there you have it. We made a backpack. Making a backpack seems like a really complicated process, and in a way it is. There's a lot to think about and there's a lot of little steps. But all of those steps can be made pretty simple, and if you have the ability to sew pieces of fabric together, you can make something like this. I definitely encourage you to try it. This isn't the last backpack I'm ever going to make, of course, and every time I make something, I find things that I would like to do differently for the next time. So just know going into it that you may make something like this and decide that there's something you don't like that you want to change or do differently the next time. And that's part of the point of making stuff, is to learn what you like and what you don't like and how to do things differently. I again want to give a really big thanks to the companies that contributed materials for this project. Big Duck Canvas for the fabrics, AustriAlpin for the Cobra buckles. Okay, they didn't provide this orange one, I bought it, but that was just because I changed my mind. I'll use the stainless steel one on another project. Outdoor Wilderness Fabrics, who provided the foam for the straps and the padding for the laptop compartment. Strapworks, who provided the 1-inch Mil-Spec webbing that I use on tons of projects. And the Thread Exchange, who provided the thread. They sent me an assortment of colors beyond what I requested, and I'm really glad they did, because I wouldn't have had this orange thread that I ended up using on most of this project. It turned out to be a really great match, so I'm glad they sent that. If you make a project based even loosely on this tutorial, I'd love to see it. If you have a blog or a YouTube channel or some other place where you share your work, post it in the comments section below so we can all check it out. Making this tutorial has been a lot of work, and it's taken a lot longer than I intended it to, partly because other things outside of this channel, and partly because it's just a complicated process. If you like this and you want to support me making this project and future projects, one way you can do that is by buying a t-shirt. You should see a Teespring shelf below this video where you can buy this shirt, and eventually I have some other designs that'll be available too. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you have questions or comments, post them in the comments section below, and if you're not already a subscriber, I'd love to have you subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much for watching.